Chapter 8. What the Wounded Leave Behind. 2 days after the battle at the cave mouth, the base at Villa Esperanza had settled into an uneasy holding pattern. No new attacks had come with nightfall. The moon had risen pale and ordinary, and for the first time since it had all begun, the perimeter watch stood down without a single shot fired. Dr. Ferreira's theory held. The waking was over, the survivors gone aground, and somewhere above the Amazon, a decision was being made in rooms none of the soldiers on the perimeter would ever see about what came next. That didn't mean it was over. Command had made that clear in the same briefing that confirmed the moon's cycle had ended. Patrols continued, wary and thorough, because Nunez himself had insisted that any creature wounded badly enough during the fighting, or simply too slow to reach the cave before dawn, might still be out there, grounded and desperate. He was right. Frank and Alan had been given a tent near the medical station. Not quite patients anymore, but not cleared to travel either. And on the second morning of the quiet, Frank finally convinced Alan to walk with him down to the river's edge, 100 meters outside the wire under armed escort, for no better reason than the simple, human need to see water that wasn't running red in his memory. "You don't have to keep watching me like I'm going to fall apart," Alan said, not unkindly, as they sat on a fallen log at the water's edge, two soldiers a respectful distance behind them. "I'm not watching you," Frank said. "I'm watching the tree lean." Force of habit. Alan managed something close to a laugh, the first in days. "Fair. For what it's worth," Frank said, quieter now. "I keep thinking I should have told Derek not to go first. Volunteering for the rope, first one down." He shook his head. "I was in charge. I said we go, and now I don't know if any of them are even." He stopped, jaw tight, staring at the water. "You didn't put that thing in the ground," Alan said. "It was already there. It would have woken up whether we found it or not." "Maybe," Frank said. "Doesn't feel that way." Neither of them heard it coming. That was, Alan would think later, the cruelest part of it. Not that the creature had been fast or clever, but that after everything, after 3 nights of horror carving itself into memory, it had come down out of a clear morning sky in near total silence, wings barely disturbing the air, and Frank had simply been sitting there, talking, alive, and then he wasn't. It hit him low and hard, claws finding purchase before either soldier could bring a weapon to bear, and the momentum carried both Frank and the creature tumbling off the log into the shallows. Alan was screaming before he understood he was doing it, scrambling backward, and the two soldiers opened fire almost point blank, riddling the creature's body until it went still, half submerged in water that had, in the space of 4 seconds, turned exactly the color Alan had spent 3 nights trying not to remember. It wasn't enough. The soldiers pulled Frank from the water, already shouting for a medic, already beginning compressions, and Alan knelt in the mud beside him, gripping his hand, saying his name over and over, as though repetition alone might undo what had already been done. Frank's eyes found his once, briefly, something almost like relief in them, or apology. "Tell them," he managed, barely a whisper. "Tell them it was worth going down. Tell them we found something worth." He didn't finish. The medic arrived seconds later, and worked for a long, useless time, and eventually stopped, and said the words Alan had known were coming before he'd even reached the log. Nunez heard about it within the hour, standing at the edge of the medical tent as Frank's body was carried past on a stretcher, and something in his face closed over the particular grief of a commander who had already lost more people this week than in the rest of his career combined. "I want that tree lean swept half-click radius, right now," he said to the officer beside him, voice flat. "Whatever's left of that thing, however many more are out there, I want them found before nightfall." The sweep found nothing that first pass, and Nunez, against the advice of 2 of his own lieutenants, insisted on walking the second perimeter check himself, at dusk, rifle in hand, because he had stopped, somewhere in the last 6 days, being the kind of officer who sent men to do what he wasn't willing to do himself. He was 50 meters from the wire, radio crackling with routine check-ins from the rest of the patrol, when something came down out of the reddening evening sky behind him, fast and silent as the thing that had killed Frank that morning, and Ricardo Nunez, who had held a perimeter against a full assault, who had carried wounded soldiers on his own back, who had looked into the dark mouth of that cave and not flinched. Never had time to turn around. The patrol found him 20 minutes later. What they found beside him, riddled with the rounds the dying man had somehow still managed to put into it before the end, told them at least that he hadn't gone without a fight. News of Nunez's death reached the press pool within the hour, and Curtis Lane, standing once more before his camera with the base burning gold in the sunset behind him, could not entirely keep the note of grim excitement out of his voice, even as he arranged his features into something resembling sorrow. Captain Ricardo Nunez, who led the defense of this base through what officials are now calling the single deadliest week in Brazilian military history, is dead, he said, and paused exactly as long as he'd practiced pausing, letting the silence do its work for the cameras. Sources within the base describe his death as sudden and, I'm told, deeply personal for the soldiers under his command. He didn't mention that he'd learned those details by badgering a grieving corporal half his age for a quote 20 minutes earlier. He never mentioned things like that. 40 kilometers south, Wade Calloway heard the news on Tiago's radio while patching a hole in the barn roof, and set down his tools for a long moment, looking out over the scorched, cratered remains of what had been, 11 days ago, a quiet cattle ranch and nothing more. Damn shame, he said quietly to no one, and picked his tools back up because there was still a roof that needed fixing and cattle that still needed a barn standing over them. Whatever else the world had decided to throw at all of them this week. That night, for the first time since the waking had begun, Alan sat alone outside the medical tent, Frank's dog tags, handed to him by a young soldier who hadn't known what else to do with them, held loosely in one hand, and understood, with a hollow, aching finality, that of the 6 who had gone down into that cave together, he no longer knew if he was the only one left. He was afraid, more than almost anything else in that long week of fear, that he already knew the answer.